Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. A short disclaimer, the information presented here is for the purpose of informing the board. The views expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of the board or any board member. We are recording today's session. You will be able to access it on our website, ssab.gov. Questions and comments are welcomed and encouraged and can be submitted via the Zoom Q&A function or emailed to events@ssab.gov. You can also tweet us at our handle @SSABGOV. Feedback is also welcome and can be sent via email to events@ssab.gov. And with that, I will hand it over to our board chair, Bob Dreendep.
Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us. On behalf of the Social Security Advisory Board, I'm pleased to welcome you to our final session of the board's fiscal year 2022 IT Speaker Series, which we call Making Secure Systems Easy for the Public to Use. Information technology plays an integral role in achieving SSA's mission, which is delivering quality Social Security services to the public. So in the fall of 2019, the board commissioned an IT systems expert panel to evaluate SSA's IT modernization efforts. The board has since continued to explore this critical area by inviting IT experts to meet with us and the public as part of its Systems Speakers series. This afternoon, we are fortunate to have Dr. Lori Craner, an expert on system security and usability, to share her thoughts with us. Dr. Craner is director and Bosch Distinguished Professor in Security and Private Technologies of SSAB, and the Fourth Systems Professor of Computer Science and of Engineering and Public Policy at Carnegie Mellon University. She also directs the SSAB Usable Privacy and Security Laboratory, known as CUPS, and co-directs the MSIT Privacy Engineering Master's Program. In 2016, she served as Chief Technologist at the U.S. Federal Trade Commission. She is also a co-founder of Wombat Security Technologies Incorporated, a security awareness training program or company that was acquired by Proofpoint. She has authored over 200 research papers on online privacy and usable security and co-edited the seminal book, Security and Usability. Dr. Craner has played a key role in building the usable privacy and security research community, and we are grateful for her participation in our speaker series. Once Dr. Craner concludes her presentation, we will welcome board and staff questions, followed by questions from the public, which you can submit via the chat function. Dr. Craner's biography is available on our website and added to the chat message. Now to our speaker. We thank you for joining us this afternoon, Dr. Craner, and I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. Let me share my screen. Okay, hopefully you can see that now. All right, so I'm going to talk with you today about some of the research that we've been doing at Carnegie Mellon about how to make secure systems easy to use. So let's start by talking about security and the role of humans. Often when we hear about humans and security, what we hear is that humans are the weakest link and they lead to human error in security. We blame humans for data breaches. Sometimes it's said that over 90% of cyber attacks are caused by human error or human behavior. That sounds pretty bad. So who are these pesky humans who are causing all these problems? Often in security, we talk about the human threat. And usually we focus on the malicious humans, those attackers who are a big problem for secure systems. But there are other humans who also end up being a big problem, and we really need to pay attention to them as well. So we have clueless humans. These humans may not realize that there is a secure task that they need to be doing. We may have unmotivated humans. These humans are busy doing their job. They think security is somebody else's job, and they're not going to spend time taking steps to make their system more secure. And then we have humans constrained by human limitations, which is pretty much all of us. So often in security, the security folks are asking us, normal humans to do things that are really difficult, like remember lots of really random looking passwords. And that's something that is hard, and they should know that we're not going to do it. So why do they keep asking us? If we look at privacy, we also have some problems. Privacy is really confusing for people. And we see the social media companies keep changing their privacy interfaces and trying to make things easier and clearer and less difficult to use. But privacy is very complicated. And so this is indeed a challenge. Now, sometimes people will say, well, we've got to find the right balance. How do we balance security and privacy and usability? But what we found in our research is that they're better together. Yeah, sometimes there are trade-offs that have to be made, but don't assume that that's what we have to do. We really need to start by looking at what our security and privacy goals are along with our usability goals, and see how we can try to achieve as much as possible together. And that will happen if we start at the beginning by considering usability as we're designing the secure system. The problem is that if we have a secure but very much unusable system, throwing it over the fence to the usability experts and expecting that they're just going to slap some usability onto it usually doesn't work very well. Now, one of the problems we have is that security and privacy are what are known as secondary tasks. This means that people who are not security practitioners rarely will voluntarily sit down and do security. They sit down in front of their computer to do their work or to socialize or play games, things like that. That's why they're using their computer. And if they have to spend time doing a security or privacy task, that takes away from what they really want to be doing. Computer scientists started looking at this issue of security and usability back in the late 1990s. And one of the earliest well-known papers in this area was called Why Johnny Can't Encrypt, the usability evaluation of PGP 5.0. And this paper basically did a user study and watched users trying to use this email encryption program called PGP. And what they found is that most users had a lot of trouble actually using this email encryption program properly. And they suggested a number of reasons why this was problematic. So this was back in 1999. 22 years later, Johnny still can't encrypt. And this is still a problem. We still have most encryption tools that people try to use that don't just work automatically. Anything that an encryption tool that involves a user interface, that user interface tends to be fairly difficult for people to use. And the underlying reason is that we keep relying on users to do security tasks that they aren't really very good at. And so let's take a look at the password problem, which is a classic example of this. So as I mentioned, we're asking users to remember lots of passwords, and we're just not very good at remembering things, or at least most of us aren't. And then we also ask people to create kind of random looking passwords. And people have a lot of misconceptions about how to do that. So we did a study where we invited people into our lab and we asked them to create some new passwords and to explain what they were doing. And we saw multiple people who looked at their keyboard and they created a password that involved a pattern on the keyboard. And then they would remark, see, I created this random password. Of course, we know that this is not random. It's just a pattern on a keyboard, and a pattern by definition is not random. But this is a very widely held misconception. We also saw that people believed that if they just added a symbol on the end of their password, it would make it secure, which is also a misconception. It turns out people generally kind of think the same way. And the exclamation point is actually by far the most common symbol that people will go ahead and add to the end of their password. So we had people in our study who said, okay, I'm creating this password. I'll make my password monkey. Yeah, I know monkey is not a secure password, so I'll put an exclamation point on the end and now it's secure. Which is wrong. Monkey is a very insecure password, and monkey exclamation point is just as insecure because the attackers know that people do this. So after they finish guessing all the words in the dictionary, then they guess all the words with an exclamation point on the end and the number 1 on the end, and then they go through other digits as well. We did another study to understand people's
Could I ask you a question?
misconceptions
Excuse me,
about
sorry.
password security.
Could I ask a question?
Oh, sure.
So this has always puzzled me. It's said that, people who want to steal your password try the dictionary and then try the dictionary with what you just said, but in different ways. I've heard this before. But most sites that at least I'm involved with, my financial sites, banks, and so on, if I enter a password 3 times and I fail, then they lock my account. How do those 2 things square?
Yeah, that's a great question. So there are 2 ways that they can try more than 3 or 5 passwords. One is that they try them slowly. So if most sites, they will lock you out after a certain number of failed attempts within a certain amount of time. So you have to find out what that amount of time is. And it may be that you can try a new password, say, every 10 minutes. And so now you can set a timer, try it every 10 minutes. Maybe you get 100 of your friends. If there's a lot of interest in hacking into a particular account, you get a lot of people to all try passwords on this account every 10 minutes. And you can quickly start trying a lot of passwords. The other approach, and this is more common, is that attackers may be able to break into a system and steal the list of passwords. And once they've stolen the list of passwords, it turns out most systems keep those passwords what's called hashed. So they've scrambled the passwords. So the attackers don't immediately have anything. They still want to get the passwords, even though they've broken into that system, because people will reuse their passwords on other systems. It's still very valuable to be able to get those passwords. So then the attackers take these hashed passwords, put that on their own system where they no longer have a limitation. They can try as many guesses as they want to crack the passwords. And they have systems, automated systems, that will actually make like billions, trillions, even more guesses. So
Thank you very much.
so that's why that's why your threat model here should not just be 3 guesses. It needs to be billions of guesses. All right, so we did this study where we showed people pairs of passwords, and we gave them a scale, and we asked them to determine which password was more secure and how much more secure, or were they equally secure. So one example here is we gave them the password I love you 88 and the password I eat kale 88. And most people had the misconception that they were equally secure because they're the same number of letters plus the exact same digits and kind of similar. So why wouldn't they be equally secure? Well, it turns out that's a misconception. And I eat kale 88 is about 4 trillion times more secure than I love you 88. And the reason for this is that people all kind of think alike. And a lot of people put the word love and the phrase I love you in their passwords. And they do it in English, they do it in other languages, they add other, seemingly random kind of things onto the end of it. It turns out that a lot of people don't like to eat kale. Certainly my kids don't like to eat kale. And so therefore it is much more common to find passwords with the phrase "I love you" in them than the phrase "I eat kale" in them. Now, part of the reason why people are so bad at figuring out how strong a password is that they have been exposed to password meters when you go and create a password and it gives you some feedback. And often those password meters don't really give you good advice. So sometimes you'll get advice like this, where it might say, change your password, strengthen the security of your account with a new password. Your password is weak, create a stronger password. Right, that's really not giving me anything very useful. We also find they often will give you a score on your password, and they will tell you good job when your password actually isn't all that good. Sometimes they'll also prompt you and say, try adding a symbol to the end of your password. And you add that exclamation point and it says, great job. And you're like, ah, that's all I needed to do to make my password secure. So in our lab, we built a better password meter, and we have a demo online that you can play with. And in this password meter, we use the results of our research, first of all, to provide a much more accurate score as to how strong the password really is. But second, when we give advice, we try to have more useful advice. So rather than telling you to put digits in your password, we say, consider inserting digits into the middle, not just at the end. And so we did some studies and we found that with this password meter, people will actually create much stronger passwords. We've also done a lot of work to try to understand, if you are a system administrator and you have a system where you are telling users what rules they have about their passwords, what rules should you give them? We actually spent 10 years looking at this problem. We tried lots of different possible password policies. And finally, in about 2 years ago, we finally came up with the answer to this question. Unfortunately, it's a little complicated, but basically what we found is that you could use a system kind of like our password meter, and the way we're scoring passwords in our password meter, which uses a machine learning approach. You could build that into your password system so that you give users feedback as they create their passwords, and you have a certain threshold, and you just don't allow them to create a password that is below that threshold. And if you do that and you give them feedback about how to make their password better, you can actually really improve the security of the passwords on your system. Now, another thing that we've seen is that users cope with a lot of passwords by reusing them. We don't want to remember lots of unique passwords, so we don't. We pick one password that hopefully is pretty good, and we keep using it over and over again. We wanted to see just how bad this problem was. So we did a study. We have a system that we collected data for several years at Carnegie Mellon called the Security Behavior Observatory. We enrolled home Windows computer users into our study. We paid them to run our software, which would collect certain data from their computer and send it to us securely. At any given time, we had about 200 active participants, and we were getting all this data from their computer, and then we would periodically reach out to them for an interview or a survey, which allowed us to get additional insights into why they were behaving the way they were. One of the bits of information we were getting were the hashes of the passwords that they were typing into their web browser on this computer. So from this, we were able to see how much people were reusing their passwords. So on average, the participants in our study had 26 different accounts that they were accessing through the web browser that we could monitor. Yeah, I think my computer was just tired. I was teaching all afternoon on a different Zoom connection with the computer, And yeah, I think it just had enough. All right, so back to where I was. So what we learned is that people in our security behavior observatory were reusing their passwords a lot. So they had 26 accounts and only 10 passwords between them. And when we looked at their passwords, only 21% of those passwords were not being used. The others were all being reused in various ways. So we thought at first, well, maybe people are only reusing some of their passwords, the ones for accounts they don't really care about. So we did an analysis looking at the different types of accounts that people had. And you can see that that little green bit, those not reused passwords, well, we didn't have very many of those really in any category. It didn't matter if it was a shopping account, a work account, financial account, people were reusing their passwords a lot. And this matters because of what I told you before, where we have these attackers that once they steal these passwords, they know that people reuse them. And so they go and try them on other accounts. So they know that your name's Jim and your password is monkey1, and they go try that combination of Jim, monkey1 at lots of other places. And then they also know that sometimes people change their password a little bit. So they'll also try Jim Monkey 2 and Jim Monkey 3 to see if that works as well. So one of the things that organizations often do to try to combat this is that they encourage users to, or require users to change their passwords frequently. And you'll even see posters like this: passwords are like underpants, change them often. And I actually really do not like this advice. It turns out that requiring users to change their password doesn't really improve security, and it just kind of annoys users. So the theory behind requiring users to change their passwords is that if a user has had their account hacked and they don't know it, so there's an attacker that's using the user's account, if the user changes their password, then that attacker will be locked out. And that theory assumes that if the user changes their password, they will change it to something that the attacker won't be able to easily guess. So they did a study over 10 years ago at the University of North Carolina to test this theory. So at UNC, all the students and faculty had to change their password every 3 months. And they were able to get the old passwords that, that people had changed and were no longer using. And what they wanted to do was to see if they know your old password, could they guess your new password? So they got all these passwords, they ran some algorithms over them, and they discovered a lot of what they called predictable transformations. So there were people who would take their old password and they'd take a lowercase letter in it and they would turn it into a capital letter. They would take a digit and they would increment it. Sometimes they thought they were being really clever. They'd take a digit and they'd convert it to the symbol that's on the same key as the digit. And this wasn't in that paper, but we've seen people will take their password and just append to it the month and year when they changed their password. And if they change their password quarterly, it's very easy to remember your password at that point. So these are some very common things. And so it turns out it's really easy for attackers to guess this. So if an attacker knows your old password, well, they found in this study that if they allowed the attacker just 5 guesses before they got locked out, they could, within 5 guesses, crack 17% of the accounts. And if they assumed that the attacker had stolen the password list and was running it on some fast computer, they found they could crack 41% of accounts in 3 seconds. So this shows that if you have people being forced to change their password, it's actually not helping you all that much. And in fact, because people know they're going to have to change their password, it's actually somewhat likely that they may go ahead and use a less secure password to begin with. Right. So when I was working at the Federal Trade Commission, I talked to the people who ran the computer systems there about this because, you know, the FTC being a government agency, we had lots of passwords for each of our government systems, and each of them had to be changed either every 60 or 90 days. And I explained to them why this probably wasn't helping security. And then I wrote this blog post, which was on the front page of the FTC website, which explained to the world why this, you know, maybe isn't all that useful. And around the same time, the security agency in the UK basically said the same thing. And then eventually NIST actually updated their guidelines on passwords, and they recommended against regular password expiry and a bunch of other things, which it was nice to see. They actually looked at our research and other researchers to see, you know, what actually does work to improve password security, and they used, you know, evidence-based policy making here. So that was nice to see. All right, well, if we can't, you know, just have people update their passwords all the time to improve security, what can we do? And two things that do work really well are two-factor authentication and password managers. But what we've seen is that unless you require people to use them, adoption of both is actually pretty low. So we did some research to try to understand why that is. So this is a picture of the Carnegie Mellon campus. And at Carnegie Mellon several years ago, we adopted a two-factor authentication solution called Duo. And we used it for our single sign-on system that you use at Carnegie Mellon to log into all of our systems, which includes email, but also things like payroll. The way it works is that when you go to the login window, you have to click the send me a push or send me a passcode, and then you can use an app on your phone to respond to it, or you can use a dongle. And we have a nice feature implemented, a remember me for 30 days. And so if you use the same device to log in within 30 days, you don't have to keep doing the Duo authentication. It assumes that it's you, and only once every 30 days you have to do that. If you switch to a different device, or an attacker tries to get into your account, and they of course would have a different device than you, they would have to authenticate. Not everybody who does two-factor authentication has this feature, but at Carnegie Mellon it seems to work really well. We were able to survey over 1,000 people at Carnegie Mellon before the mandatory adoption deadline, and then again 3 months after the deadline. And we also were able to get data from the help desk and access logs. So one of the interesting things we found is that the faculty and staff 3 months later said, yeah, it's working really well. And the students were more negative about it. And basically what we found is, you know, the faculty and staff, they're all in their offices using the same computer all the time. And so they were only having to use Duo once every 30 days. Whereas the students were in the computer labs, and every time they walked up to a different computer in the computer lab, they had to re-authenticate with Duo. And sometimes it was the end of the day, the battery on their phones was going out. And so it was much more annoying for them. We also found that people who hadn't used a two-factor authentication before really needed some convincing. They didn't think that they had anything that was important enough that they should bother with it. They'd heard other people didn't like it, and so they didn't want to use it. But then when we interviewed them or surveyed them 3 months later, we found that they actually got used to it, and they discovered it really wasn't that bad. Now, this wasn't a ringing endorsement. It's not actually that horrible, but it's okay. It works. We also found, as far as security went, it dramatically decreased the security incidents with the computer systems at Carnegie Mellon. So it did its job for security, and it turned out for the most part, it was okay for usability. But a big reason for that was because Carnegie Mellon activated that 30-day Remember Me feature. We've heard from colleagues at other universities where they have not activated that feature, and people find it much more annoying. Okay, I also mentioned that password managers are really useful. And the reason that the password managers are useful is you don't have to actually come up with a really clever, memorable password. You let your password manager randomly pick one for you, and that is truly random, not something that a human just sort of thinks is random. Your password manager will store it for you, and then you can get a password manager that will automatically fill it in for you at websites. So it's pretty convenient too. So I've been using a password manager for several years, and a lot of my security colleagues also use password managers, but not that many people in the general public are using them. So we did a study to find out why the adoption rates were so low. And what we saw is, first of all, there were some people who didn't know they even existed. There were also people who didn't think that reusing their password was really a bad thing. Whereas they'd heard you're not supposed to write down your passwords, and they thought, oh, a password manager is like writing down my password. I shouldn't do that. The truth is that actually reusing your password is much more dangerous. And there's really very little harm in writing down your password if you write it down and keep it in a secure place like a password manager. Also, some people were concerned, well, what if somebody compromises my password manager? Now I'm in trouble. And I won't tell you that that's not a risk. It certainly is a risk, but it's a very low risk. And most experts will say that the risk of having any one of your accounts compromised, where you might be reusing the same password in lots of other accounts, it's a much bigger risk than the risk of somebody compromising your password manager. Another reason that some people didn't want to use a password manager is that either they tried it or one of their friends tried it and it was confusing. And unfortunately, some of them still are kind of confusing, although in recent years, I think the user interfaces have gotten a lot better. And another thing that we saw is that some people, instead of using a password manager that you download, they just use the password managers that are built into most web browsers. And that's a good thing to do too, except that what a lot of people do is they just use their web browser to store their bad passwords. They're not actually using the feature to generate a good random password. So if you're just using your web browser or your password manager to store your bad passwords, that's not really helping your security. All right, I want to talk a little bit about privacy as well. And I'm going to focus on privacy and transparency. So we'll start with privacy policies and nutrition labels. So the problem with privacy policies is they pretty much look like this. They're really long and nobody wants to read that. We actually did a study where we looked at how many words were in privacy policies and how many different websites people visit and how long it would take to do all that reading. And we found that on average, it would take people 244 hours per year to read all the privacy policies they encounter. And of course, nobody does that. I mean, I study privacy policies and I don't do that. And this is widely acknowledged. There was a White House report back in 2014 that referred to a fantasy world, if you think that people actually read this stuff. And that's with websites. What if we have IoT devices? You can't really like stop that drone that's flying by and ask it its privacy policy, or look at the privacy policies on smart light bulbs or smart thermostats. That doesn't really work. So, we wonder, how can we actually put people in control over their personal information if, they can't even read these privacy policies? So what can we do? And I'm all about doing research and testing. And, I've heard lots of people come up with solutions that are completely untested. So I want to know, well, how do we know if we've succeeded? So, if we're going to show people a privacy notice, there are a bunch of things that we want to know. We want to know whether they even noticed the notice. They noticed that there's a privacy policy. Did they read it? Did they understand it? Did it convey actual useful information that they wanted to know? And did it impact their behavior? Did they actually use it to make an informed decision about whether or not to interact with a service or provide their personal information? So when I was at the FTC, I actually organized a workshop to talk about this. And I was very interested in the privacy aspects, but there are people at the FTC who worry about a lot of other things besides privacy. The FTC regulates things like, the laundry tag symbols and organic product labels and a whole range of different types of consumer messaging. So we held a workshop called Putting Disclosures to the Test, and we invited experts from a variety of different fields where there are consumer disclosures. And these were experts who had done research on how to make sure that consumers actually could understand and use these disclosures. And we talked about what was being done in each of these different areas. And what we found is that even though none of these people had ever talked to each other before, they were all doing basically the same thing. And so that was good to see. And there's great materials from this workshop on the FTC website, and I see the link is in the chat. So the first thing the expert said is it's really important to do some testing. And even if you don't have a big budget for testing or very much time for testing, even a small user test can actually uncover a lot of problems that are pretty common with disclosures. And we can fix it if we just show them to like 10 people who aren't us. The other thing that they said is that it's not enough to just show someone a disclosure like a privacy policy and say, does it make sense to you? Read it. You need to test it in context. And so it's helpful if you give people a task and see whether they can actually use that information to make a decision. So an example we get from our friends who test labels on over-the-counter medication is that if you're testing, say, the label on a bottle of children's Tylenol, what you might do is you may give a parent a scenario where you say, it's midnight and your 6-year-old child wakes up with these sorts of symptoms. Here's a bottle of children's Tylenol you found in the medicine cabinet. Should you give this to your child? And if so, what dose? Right? To see whether they can actually read the label and understand the important information on it. And we can do the same thing with privacy policies as well. So another idea that has come up repeatedly is, can we use something like nutrition labels? So nutrition labels on food items work pretty well. So could we have a privacy nutrition label? And the idea here would be we would use a standardized format and people would learn how to use it over time, would have standardized language. We're not all born knowing what cholesterol is, but after a while we keep seeing that word over and over again. And we're like, oh, okay, I see all these things have cholesterol, right? We could do the same thing for privacy. We also want something really brief, like a nutrition label, and then a link to an extended view that would give you more detailed information. So in my lab, we came up with a proposal for how to do this. We have types of information down the left side, and we have uses of information across the top. And then we use dark colors to show that this combination of type of information and use of information is active, and the light color to show that it's not. And so at a glance, you can get an idea of how much information this company is collecting. We also see that in the US, we have financial privacy policies that follow this very standardized label format. So here we have the privacy policy from 2 different American banks, and its format is very similar. They're each using their colors, but you can see that it's laid out the same way. And the key part here is this table that's at the second half, the bottom of the page, where we have rows which ask questions about what the bank does with data, yes or no. And you can put them side by side and compare them very easily. In fact, this is so nice that we can even have computers go and collect all this information and do even more with it. So in my lab, we wrote a web crawler that went and collected over 6,000 of these bank privacy notices, and we put them in a database that's searchable by consumers. Now that we have a demo running, this is not up to date. This is based on the data we collected several years ago, but it gives you the idea of how this could work, where you can search for banks in your zip code or particular types of banks, savings banks or whatnot, and then see side by side a comparison of the types of data practices that they have. We also looked at the idea of having privacy nutrition labels in app stores. Now, this is work that we did back in 2012. So this was 10 years ago. And we came up with a mock-up of what would it look like if there was a privacy facts label in the Android App Store. We actually did a user study where we showed people our mocked up app store. And we asked them to help us select some apps for a friend. Half the people would see our privacy facts label and half the people did not. And what we saw is that without the privacy facts label, people did not consider privacy at all when picking out apps for their friend. But when they saw privacy facts, they started actually paying attention to privacy. It wasn't the only thing. If they saw an app that they had used before and they knew the brand, they would often pick it, even if its privacy policy wasn't as good as another one. But if they were deciding between apps that they were otherwise unfamiliar with, then privacy was often a deciding factor that they would use. So it was really exciting to see 10 years later when Apple and then later Google announced that they would actually start putting nutrition labels in their app stores. So Apple's privacy nutrition labels launched last December 8th. And actually that is at this point 2 years ago, December 8th. They are now available for millions of iOS apps. And I believe the Google app privacy labels will be launching fairly soon. These labels are pretty cool. They provide a lot of interesting information. We've discovered that there's still a lot of problems with them. We've done some user testing with them and have found that they're not perfect. And we're hoping that Apple will improve them further and that Google will also learn from some of the things that we've come up with. But it's really nice to see them taking this step and moving in this direction. We've also been looking at IoT devices and saying, how can we inform people not just about privacy, but also security of IoT devices? You know, when you go to buy a smart video camera, a smart doorbell, smart light bulb to put in your home, you want it to be secure and private. But currently, if you walk into Home Depot or you look online at Best Buy or Amazon or any of these companies, there is almost no information available about security and privacy for these IoT devices. So we came up with this idea of a privacy and security facts label. And we did several rounds of testing, both with consumers as well as with experts in privacy and security and IoT to come up with a label. It turns out there's a lot of information that experts would like to see on the label, and it's pretty overwhelming. So we came up with this layered label, and what you see on the left is what would actually go on the packaging or on the website, and it gives you kind of just the basic information that's most useful to consumers about security and privacy of their device. But if you want more information, you can click on a link or scan the QR code, and then you get the version on the right that has a lot more detailed information. All right, I wanted to talk a little bit about icons. This is humor. Women stalked across 8 websites by obsessed shoe advertisement. But I can't tell you how many friends have told me about this experience, and they'll say, oh my gosh, you know, I bought some shoes online last week and now I just can't get the shoe ads to go away. And I've experienced that myself. I buy shoes online from time to time, and I have definitely seen this phenomenon. And, you know, I get ads that look like this. And the thing is, though, because I study this, I'm aware that I can find out exactly why I'm getting those shoe ads, and I can make them go away if I want. There's this little icon in the corner of most of these ads, and most people are not familiar with it, but I am. And let me blow it up for you so that you can see what it looks like. It's a little blue triangle thingy. We did a study to find out whether our impression that most people didn't know what this is was true, because the ad industry was going around saying, hey, we've completely solved this problem. We have this icon, everybody's using it. So we did a study with 1,500 people online to find out whether people recognize the ad choices icon. And so we showed them ads which had the icon in the corner with a tagline next to it. Usually that tagline says ad choices, but sometimes it says other things. And then we made up a few other possible things that you might put next to it. And then we asked people questions like, what would happen if you clicked on the icon? And we gave them various multiple choices and they could select more than one. So when we did this with the word ad choices next to the icon, more than half the people thought that more ads would pop up, which is wrong. It's completely wrong. And about half the people thought it would take you to somewhere where you could actually buy ads on the website, and that's also wrong. Only 27% of people had the right answer, which is it will take you to a page where you can opt out of tailored ads, which is why the industry was claiming that this helps address the privacy issues. But only 27% of people know this, and everybody else was afraid to click on this icon because they thought they would just get more ads. If we change the words next to the icon to be configure ad preferences, we discovered that things look a lot better. And we actually have 50% of the people who get the right answer. Now, 50% is still not great, but it's much better than 27%, which suggests that if you actually did more testing, and especially if the ad industry did more testing, they could probably come up with something better. Now, we ourselves were involved with doing some icon testing for the state of California. The California Consumer Privacy Act regulations included the idea that you could have a link on a website that says, do not sell my information. And this would be required for websites doing business with people in California. And optionally, it could include a button or logo. So we asked the California Attorney General's office what that button or logo was going to look like. And they said they didn't know, and they had a public comment period. So my students had 90 days to try to come up with some ideas, and we decided we would do that. We do some, not only would we come up with ideas, but we would actually test them and send our report to the California Attorney General's office. So they came up with some ideas related to choice and consent with check marks and X's. They came up with ideas related to opting out with arrows, like lifting things out of boxes and holes and folders. And they came up with ideas that had $ and slashes for do not sell my personal information. They also thought we should test that industry icon, which the industry claims if you make it green, then it means do not sell my personal information. We were a little skeptical. So we did some testing. We narrowed down the list of icons. We added color to them. And then we added the do not sell my personal information tagline, as well as some other taglines that we liked better. We did the combo testing in the context of a website. So we made up this footwear website, and we put the icon and the tagline at the bottom of the website, and we asked the users to do various tasks on the website, and tried to find out from them what they thought would happen if they clicked on this icon and tagline. Based on doing all of this, we found out that actually the icon really needed to have the tagline next to it. Even our best icons didn't do so well without the tagline. And we found that the best icon was this one here, which is our blue toggle button. And so we wrote a report and we recommended this. And shortly thereafter, the Attorney General announced that they were going to recommend this red version, which looks kind of similar to ours, but it's red and it has an important difference. And this important difference is that the Attorney General's version looks very much like an iOS toggle switch and many other toggle switches that you'll see on websites. And we were concerned about consumer confusion. So we did another study for them where we tested our icon against theirs, and then we also tested a slightly different version of theirs with a bigger X, and then we swapped the colors to see if that made a difference. We found that the big X versus the little X, no difference. But there was a big difference between our stylized toggle and their like actual toggle. And we also found that there were only small differences based on color. So, what we learned here, besides that they should have just stuck with the one we recommended, was that sometimes small changes don't really matter very much, but sometimes they make a really big difference. And you really have to test everything in order to know what's going to work with consumers and what's not. So then the Attorney General said, okay, we're not going to have any icon for now. We'll come back to it. Then they sent us some new icons to test, which were actually fairly similar to some of the icons we already tested. And they wanted us to test them this time only with California consumers, not on a national scale. And there were a bunch of other things they asked us to test along the way. We did that. We found that none of their new icons were any good. So they eventually, 6 months later, actually adopted the icon that we recommended to them. So that was pretty exciting. Unfortunately, because it's optional, we're actually not really seeing anybody actually use it. So that's the next problem, is how do you get people to actually use it? But we would like this icon to be used not just in the state of California. We think this could be a good privacy options icon for any website anywhere that has privacy choices for people to make. This could be a standard icon that people could learn to look for in order to find their privacy choices. Okay, last thing I want to talk about is cookie banners. You've all probably seen lots of cookie banners lately. People in Europe see even more than we do in the US. And so we found cookie banners to be very unusable. And so we took a step back and we said, well, what would make a consent interface usable? And here's our list. It needs to actually address user needs. It needs to require minimal effort to use. People need to know what choices exist, or even the fact that they have choices. It needs to easily convey what the choices are and what the consequences are. People need to be satisfied with the interface, not be annoyed by it. They need to trust that their choices will actually be honored. They have to be able to change their decision if they change their mind or click the wrong thing. And it shouldn't have what's often referred to as a dark pattern. It shouldn't nudge people towards the less privacy protective options. So if you look at most cookie consent banners, they actually violate a lot of these principles. They tend to nudge people to accept all cookies, which is the least privacy protective option. They require you to take extra steps in order to find out what your choices actually are. We see a big button for accept all cookies, but the cookie settings button is a link that I have to go follow and go somewhere else to find out my choices. So we did a study to evaluate a bunch of different types of cookie consent interfaces and see which ones were better. We started by my students went and looked at 200 different cookie consent banners and kind of manually evaluated them. And then we selected 12 different designs that we put on kind of a standard website. And we did an evaluation where we sent people to the website and we asked them to look at the website and put an item in their shopping cart and then answer some questions. And we wanted to see, there were people randomly got one of these 12 banners. We wanted to see the impact of these different banners. So this was what we called our best practices variant. This one is pretty nice. It could be improved, but it's pretty nice. It's a fully blocking design, so it pops up on your screen, and you can't actually use the website until you do something. It has all the options in line on the bottom. You don't have to click somewhere else to find out what your choices are. It has nice bulleted text, so you've got all your information easy to read. It tells you what the buttons do. They don't just say like, okay, but they actually say what's going to happen when you click on them. And if you want a more detailed view, you could go to one page that talks about all the cookies in one place. And it also tells you how you can change your mind, which it turns out this is what it looks like on the website. And there's a cookie preferences button that always stays on the bottom of the screen, and you can always go back to it to change your mind. On the other hand, this one is really bad. This one is on the bottom of the screen. You don't have to interact with it. You can scroll past it. And if you click on the more information link, you get this multi-paged screen where you can only see one type of cookie at a time, and you have to click through multiple pages in order to get information. It has text that suggests that you might be missing out on something if you don't take all their cookies. It's one big paragraph. You don't have the bullets. It just has an OK button. It's not really clear what that means. OK, what? And it doesn't tell you anything about how to change your mind. And this is what it looks like on the website. We also tested one that was just a cookie preferences button and nothing else. If you clicked it, then you would get all the choices. And it looks like this on the website. We tested 9 others. I won't go into the details of those. Okay, here is a graph of the result. So what we actually tested lots of things. I'm just showing you one of the many results. And that was that we wanted to find out which button would people click, what would they do? And what we saw is that there were a bunch of conditions where about a third of the people, instead of saying accept all cookies, they said accept only strictly necessary cookies. And those were all the conditions that actually showed all the choices right there on the screen. The conditions that didn't show all the choices, there hardly anybody did anything except accepting all cookies. What we found is that whether we had paragraphs or bullets and the exact wording on the buttons didn't make a huge difference in what buttons people clicked. It made some difference in how much people liked it and how satisfied they were with it, but it didn't make much difference as far as what people clicked on. Here we have the options that didn't have all of the options on the screen, and you can see there, everybody's just accepting all cookies, or they're not doing anything. So those purple bars represent people who did nothing. And it turns out that this condition here, nobody ever clicked on that button. They just ignored it and went through to shop on the website. Lots of interesting learnings from there. We see that in the absence of these inline options, there's much less investment in decision making. And when we asked people afterwards, how did you decide what to click on? Some people were like, I wasn't really paying attention. I just did the easiest option. I didn't think about this carefully. And they were much more likely to say that in the conditions where they couldn't see those options on the screen. Now, we also in our study, we had people go back after they'd made the decision, and we said, okay, go look at it again. And then we asked them some questions about, what do you think each of these different types of cookies is? And we found that the people who had all the options up front, they selected options, but there were no definitions of the cookies. And these cookies, functional cookies, they didn't know what a functional cookie was. Whereas the people who had to drill down, they knew what it was because, we forced them to go read that. But they weren't actually going to read it, except, we were paying them and we told them to go back and do it. So we'd like to see an interface that actually has maybe a mouse over or something so you can get that information without having to go click through. Let's see, I'm going to skip over. The other issue is that there are some standard names for cookies, including performance cookies and functional cookies, that actually really confuse people. Less than half the people actually knew what those meant. So we think it might be time to think about some better naming here. My students are actually doing some work right now to try to figure out what would be a better thing to call them besides performance cookies and functional cookies that actually is more intuitive to people about what they actually do. Finally, this whole idea of cookie banners, even if we use the best cookie banners, it's still kind of annoying to keep having to click these things. And so we think that a better long-term solution would be able to set up in your browser information about the types of cookies you like, and then let your browser just handle it all for you. And you could override it if you wanted. So, if you're at a website and you click on something and the website says, oh, actually, you can't do that because you're not allowing the cookies, you could say, oh, allow it now. But that would be much less burdensome than having to deal with these cookie banners at every website. All right, let me wrap up with a few extra points here. So first, from the beginning, I mentioned don't think in terms of trading off security and privacy and usability. Think about ways that we can have it all. Not always possible, but sometimes we can. Don't ask people to do security tasks that they aren't good at. If we want to know if something's usable, we actually have to test with the types of people who will actually be using it. And then we should look for ways that we can automate and standardize our solutions to make it much easier for people. And this includes things like having standardized icons and notice formats, using machine readable notices and search engines, using password managers so that the password manager can store all your passwords for you. Solutions like that are actually going to improve usability and allow you to have security and privacy. And I'll end there and take a few more questions.
Well, I'm happy to start. That was very, very informative. Social Security Administration has begun to use facial recognition, and many people, including members of Congress, have been concerned about the equity of that, as well as privacy issues. Obviously, it makes usability and security and heightens that so that they do go together, as you say. What is your sense about facial recognition technology?
Yeah, a lot of mixed feelings about facial recognition technology. So clearly it raises a lot of privacy concerns to people. There are also concerns about accuracy and kind of systemic discrimination, where it's more accurate with certain types of populations based on gender, color of your skin, things like that, where it is more accurate or less accurate. So those are all concerns. Also, there's the concern of what do you do with the face that you recognize, and what is the consequence of a false recognition? If what you do is you set a police department to identify a suspect, and without anybody thinking about it, you send out the police to go arrest somebody based on face recognition, that's probably a bad idea. If on the other hand, you use it to identify possible suspects, and then you have detectives go actually do some work and try to figure out whether it makes any sense that these people could have actually been associated with this crime, right? That might be a better idea. But even better would be to use technology that had been tested to know that it doesn't, that isn't more likely to have false positive results with, African-American people and things like that. So I think, all those are issues. I know the recent, issue that the IRS had, another complexity was that there's a private company that has this facial recognition database, and, questions like, do we want to trust that private company with all of this personal information, and how are they going to be securing the information? And so those issues are of concern as well.
And in fact, that's a very good point, because SSA, I think, is using that same identity.me or something like that. It's the same private contractor.
Yeah. So I would say I wouldn't rule it out, right? I think there's a lot of potential for increasing usability by using face recognition, and also preventing identity theft, which is another huge issue. We want to minimize identity theft. And so if this is a tool that can help us do it, that might be a good thing. But I think we need to make sure we do due diligence to make sure that it's not discriminatory, that we're not opening up more security vulnerabilities by using a private company to do this, and things like that.
Thank you.
So
Lori,
if I may, sorry, go ahead, Kim.
okay, thanks, Jagadish. Lori, it's Kim Hildred. I just wanted to know, Social Security deals with tens of millions of people all the time. And I'm just wondering whether in any of your research, have you honed in on seniors, people with disabilities, people who may not be so savvy? Is your research, basically the recommendations of your research, is that applicable to anyone, or is there certain are there certain things that SSA needs to be mindful of with those populations, especially as they're trying to shift more and more people to online services?
Yeah, so most of our research, we try to get a pretty good cross section, and we don't necessarily focus specifically on those groups, which means that in a cross section, we're not going to have a lot of people represented, from the disability community or older Americans. But we have in some studies, we have actually looked at them a little bit more closely. I think we really need to think about how their needs are different from the rest of Americans. And a lot of their needs are similar, but there are some things that are different, and that should be considered. And I think the big ones are that they're just less familiar with the technology, and so things that a kid will just be like, well, of course you click here, like, are not so obvious, right? So we really have to make it super obvious, what the path is and how to do things. There also are visual acuity issues as well that come up. There are trust issues. There's also issues as to what kinds of devices they may be using. It may be that their only computer device is actually a phone, and they have this little tiny device that they're trying to see and do things on. So those are all important things to take a look at.
Thank you.
Jagadish?
So thank you. So your presentation is quite extensive and comprehensive, and we get the benefit of listening to you with all the explanations. But following up on Kim's point about research on different types of Social Security beneficiaries and users of Social Security services and benefits. Obviously, all of this information cannot be conveyed in this form with 100 or so slides to the users of Social Security. So my question is, what is the best? I mean, Social Security sends very, thinks a lot about how to convey information about benefit eligibility, how much benefits people receive, if they retire at different ages, and so on, what the options are for spouses, all of these different and important aspects of their choices upon retirement, upon getting disabled, or different options. But obviously, this information is also very important to communicate. I don't know how much thought has gone into providing beneficiaries with this type of information to educate them and to improve their behavior with regard to security and privacy and so on. Have you thought about collapsing this information into a one-pager, which is the most efficient way of communicating it, which Social Security could adopt, for example?
Yes. Yeah, so actually, I'm often asked to give consumer advice, and this presentation wasn't a consumer advice presentation, but we actually have come up with, I have a postcard on password security that we go to community events and we've handed out this postcard, and it's the very small amount of information that we can fit on a postcard that is what you need to know about password security. I've also done one on kind of privacy habits, and we have a little pamphlet that we handed out on privacy habits. So we and other organizations have come up with these sorts of things, and Social Security could certainly adapt some of these things. Some of these have been tested. Others have not been actually tested with the target audience. I don't know of any that have actually been tested, with seniors. And so, it would be good to actually, commission a study to have someone actually make sure that seniors can really understand the information.
Thank you.
Dr. Crater, one of the things you talked about earlier was the attackers who may want to find out what your password is in a particular area. And we've asked other experts about that, and they say, well, Social Security is just the most wonderful place to go attack because that's where the money is. But I'm wondering if you have done any research or know of any about how the bad guys decide who to target when they're looking to get into an account.
Yeah, that's a good question. So there are some bad guys who have, very targeted attacks that, that there's a person, usually a celebrity, or an organization, usually a company or a government organization that they want to target. Because that's where the money is, basically. But most attackers are just targeting everybody. And they are just, going out there and trying everything until they until some door budges and they get in.
Thanks. Conway, unless board members have other questions right now, I'd hand it over to public questions. Conway.
Sure, we have one, and it's about the toggle. Is it possible that people are skeptical of clicking the add choices button because previously clicking on any banner ad, the X or close button would really open up another ad? How can we change this learned behavior of internet users?
Yeah, I'm sure that's a big reason why people don't want to click on that little triangle. And a reason why perhaps that little triangle was a bad choice for the ad industry to select. So I think, this is really, the ad industry should be solving this problem. Like, they go and figure out how to persuade people of a lot of things, like that's their job, right? They sell ads, and they should be able to do the user testing of either how to change the icon or the tagline, or to basically sell ads to educate people about what they can actually do to control their privacy. So yeah, I would like to see them step up and actually do something that's more useful.
Great. And then there's also a request to see if the postcard, the password postcard, is publicly available. I did a quick search and couldn't find it. So if it is available, we'd like to pass that along. But if not,
I don't think it's currently on the website, but I can add it to our passwords website. I just have to find the file.
well, I think there's an interest in it. So
okay, I can. I see. I have a stack of them sitting right there. I actually do have them here. So.
Well, that's all.
I'm sorry, Conway.
No, that's all for the public question.
I did have one question, which is totally personal, I think, unless others have had this experience, but with passwords and so forth, having multiple devices seems to me to be very confusing. So right now I'm looking at you on my laptop. I have a phone, I might have an iPad or a similar device, and keeping all of those passwords straight and having access to different devices just seems to multiply the difficulties. Do you have any advice on that score?
Yeah, you should get a password manager that you can sync across your devices. So that's what I do. I have one password manager and I use it on my phone. I use it on my iPad. I use it on my laptop, and I have all the passwords on all of those devices. Great. And it's secure.
Bob, if you can, I do have another question for you. This is fascinating. One thing that happens with Social Security Administration, it's not just people, there's of course the identity theft, but apparently a lot of scam people committing scams will phone, and the caller ID will show up, Social Security Administration, and then they'll ask things that SSA would never ask, but to give them various information that people then give. Is there anything to protect? And then the problem is then people are reluctant to respond when it really is a legitimate call. Any thoughts about that whole area of scamming?
Yeah, that's a huge problem, and it's been a problem for like 20 years now. So I would say there are a few things. One is that the phone companies should really be stepping up and doing something to basically do something about being able to do that kind of spoofing. That's on the phone companies, and that's something that we need the FCC to get on, right? Another thing is that we need to educate people that government agencies will never ask you these sorts of questions. And it's not just, the Social Security Administration, the IRS won't ask you either, right? And, a good, public service announcements and stuff that teach people that, would be a good idea. And then the third is to, in those cases where you actually do call people, make sure that the script for how you introduce yourself and how you call them is reinforcing the safe behaviors. How do I know that it really is the Social Security Administration calling me? What is it that you can tell me? When something that I've seen some credit card companies do, because they have the same issue, oh, it's your bank calling you, is they'll say, if you want to know that it's really us, get out your credit card, look on the back, call that number, and give them, code 359, whatever, right? And it'll reroute you back to me, because now I know that's the number that's printed on my credit card. It will get me back there. I don't know what the right thing for the Social Security Administration is, but you need some way that you can give that someone can independently verify that they're talking to the right place.
Oh, that's very helpful.
Other questions for today?
What is, one issue, what is your view about the increasing sentiment in favor of biometric type of identity devices?
Yeah, so
facial recognition being one of them, I suppose.
Yeah. Biometrics are really convenient, and we're all getting used to using face recognition or fingerprint recognition on our phones to unlock our phones, and so people are getting more comfortable with that. But on the other hand, as I mentioned earlier, there are all sorts of problems with it, especially when used by government organizations. So I think it's something that could be a very useful tool to allow for authentication and prevent identity theft, but I think we have to use it very carefully.
Well, I'd like to thank you again, Dr. Craner, for this very enlightening and interesting presentation. I found your slide deck to be totally informative of and very useful personally, as well as some great ideas to bring back to Social Security. And this actually concludes our system speakers series on system security and usability. And this was a great presentation to conclude that for us. So we thank all of our participants who stuck with us even through an ironic computer crash. And we want to wish everyone a safe and enjoyable week. So take care, and we'll see you again soon.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
You.